I won't murder his last name, so anyway, Tim, he's going to read from, which book is this? Skulls.
I don't read.
All you.
Okay. This book is actually kind of a crossover young adult book. Basically, a young man stumbles across the bunker in the middle of Ruidoso Mountains. Inside that bunker is a whole bunch of skulls set up in little earthen niches. What he realizes when he goes in here is that he can look into the eyes of the skulls, and he ultimately finds out these skulls were the victims of serial killers. And he in turn can see their deaths through their eyes as it happens. You read one of the murder victims here. Basically it starts right before the murder, essentially. The woods clustered claustrophobic around Dennis Jones, but not as thick as the emotions that crowded his head and shadowed his heart. Been an outcast so long, he didn't know what the work meant anymore. Dennis trudged through the Ruidoso forest, hoping to chase away the demons of his home life. His father, out in the free world for a record 6 months the last time, once more found the easy way back to jail. Again, as always, he took his family's spirit with him. His meager paycheck, what hadn't been blown on drugs and alcohol, had gone away as well. At 16, Dennis had once more become the man of the house, a role for which he was ill-suited, more so each time his dad was locked up. He was quiet and unassuming, a C-quality student at the best of times. He struggled to keep his part-time sales job at a small t-shirt shop off the main strip. The shop catered to tourists, and he didn't fit the vacation town's ideal image. The water off more often than on. His greasy hair and thrift store clothing led to his hours being cut all the time. His shifts were relegated to the times when business was slowest. It was only the compassion and understanding of the owner, Miss Hernandez, who was well aware of his plight, which kept him there at all. There was only so much he could do for him there. His mother suffered from hypertension and depression and a host of physical ailments that left her unfit to work. Her alcoholism only added to the cocktail of inability. When Dennis was home, he was saddled with everything she couldn't handle, which was pretty much everything. His days started with chores and progressed steadily through catering to his mother, picking her up off the floor at the end of the night and dumping her limp body into bed. Often Dennis sat semi-conscious in a chair in her room, waking up with a start to turn her onto her side to keep her from choking on her vomit. The last of the utility money was spewed warm across the mattress. More often than not, he'd clean the mess and try once more to sleep. The bitter smell of regurgitated alcohol lingered in his nose. When he wasn't at work or school or tending to his mother, Dennis found what solace he could in the woods. Still sore from the beating his father had given him before he left, all the bruises conveniently hidden, Dennis needed the escape. Up on the hill, well into Old Man Jenks' property, he wandered without direction, every step a nagging pain. His chest and stomach hurt, but it was his head that needed healing. A thick fog of despair crowded his mind, casting a black pallor over every thought. Though there wasn't much peace to be found anywhere for Dennis, the woods gave him a few minutes away from his problems. It was often just enough to give him the courage to go home. The animals and insects he shared his walk with didn't badger him with questions or tease him for not showering. They simply went about their business as he went about his. It was a comfortable counterpoint to all the screaming and crying that leached the joy from his life. As he strolled between trees, his chin raised just enough to see what lay right before him, he wondered how much more he could take. It was a question he asked himself often. His jaw hurt every night when he crawled into bed, clenched his teeth all day. He could feel it aching even then, and took a moment out in the woods to relax. Caught up in his own world, Dennis didn't realize someone had come up behind him until he heard the snap of a dry twig. He spun around to see a gloved fist smash into his face. Just like he did at home, he took the blow without complaint. His head throbbed. Bright light pierced his lidded eyes like scalpels as Dennis flickered into awareness. Strands of his hair clung to his face and he reached to brush them away, but he couldn't move his arm. He squinted and looked up to see a metal clamp around his wrist. It held his arm pinned to the wall that pressed uncomfortably into his back. He glanced at his other hand to see the same kind of shackle. Dennis swallowed hard, the pressure against his throat making it difficult. He lifted his chin and found the wall, his back of his skull thumped against it. Able to breathe a little better, he braved the glare of the light. As though staring into the sun, dots of darkness danced across his eyes. The brilliance was almost too much to bear. He shook his head a little. Some more of his hair dropped into his face to help shield his eyes against the light. Partially successful, he let his gaze drift to the side of the light where he could see some shadows beyond. Something moved in him. Dennis's mind cleared quickly from the blow. He was used to it. He stared at the shape that came to stand beside the light. His subconscious mind recognized the shape of a man. He knew the man's eyes were on him. He could feel their stare. Several moments passed, the silence in the room deafening. Dennis never took his eyes off the figure. After what seemed forever, the shadows swirled and parted. The colossus of a man stepped into the light. The brightness tamed by the man's presence, Dennis could see clearly at last. Masked, twin orbs of black stared at him from the eye holes of the ski mask. Dennis couldn't look away. Dressed in all black, every inch of skin covered, save for his eyes, the man came to stand before Dennis. The smooth dark leather of his apron shimmered in the reflected light. In his hand he held an axe. Dennis knew right then what fate had in store for him. He sighed, expecting no less, but he couldn't bring himself to be afraid. Born into suffering, Dennis had never known anything else. He'd been beaten for as long as he could remember. Starved and neglected, he spent many nights sleeping under the stars. The cold and wet grass was better than the lice-infested mattress that squirmed beneath him. He'd never known love and truly never expected he ever would. He'd never felt welcome in the world. His cruelty's a prison. His sentence was life. As he stared into the man's dark eyes, he saw mercy buried there, a reprieve from the sadness that hung over him like a funeral shroud. His heart thumped hollow in his chest and he swallowed deep, moistening his mouth to speak. "Kill me," Dennis said in a whisper. The words lingered in the air. The man's eyes widened a moment as he stared at Dennis, and narrowed to tiny slits. He reached out and set his gloved hand gently on Dennis's cheek before brushing the strands of hair out of his face. He nodded, the wish granted. The man took a step back as Dennis drew one last breath. Cold air tingled in his lungs. His eyes locked on the axe, and he watched as it was hefted in the air. The glistening edge sparkled into the light. As it streaked toward him, Dennis couldn't help but feel relief. He watched the axe through dry eyes until it disappeared from view. The shuddering thud of its impact echoed through his bones. There was a sudden sense of falling, and Dennis saw the ground approach. He felt the rough plastic flooring scratch at his cheek when he landed. His eyes lolled back and forth a moment before settling. He looked at his body and marveled. It twitched and struggled against its spines, a geyser of red spewing from its neck. He sighed, his sight darkened at the edges, glanced at the man who knelt before him. Dennis met his gaze and smiled up at him. The man was slowly swallowed by the encroaching darkness. But he couldn't be sure through the mask. He thought the man had smiled back. It was Dennis's last thought.